part of the reason I'm wearing the tie is I was at Forever Changes the other day, and he put on Annie DeFranco, and then he said something about her being a gay icon, and I'm like, I thought it was just good music. And he explained that because in the 90s she dressed a certain way and looked a certain way, and I'm like, yeah, but I dressed that way all through the 80s. And he said in the 80s androgyny was really big. In the 90s it meant something if you wore a tie. And I'm like, no, it's just fun, right?
Yeah.
And so then it made me think about brownies. And like I said, I lived in Berkeley for a short while as a kid. And in brownies, you had to learn how you put on the brown outfit, and then you had to tie the little orange tie. And the reason you couldn't wear a clip-on tie, like the Boy Scouts did, was you had to learn to tie a tie so that when you got married, you could tie the tie for your husband.
What?
Yes.
What?
That sounds right.
Yeah, see, you know. Right.
Ironically, in Boy Scouts, they just gave us a little thing to put around those scarves and pull it up.
Right,
And did not teach us how to tie a tie.
Wow, interesting, because your wife is.
right. Yeah, your wife is gonna do it.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I've always known how to tie a tie, and I know men who do not know how to tie a tie.
Yeah.
Every time I learn, I forget.
And like 6 years ago, I had somebody say, well, I don't know how to tie a tie. And I just put it on and put it over his head, and that's. But isn't that nice?
Yes.
So today, in honor of Annie DeFranco and 8-year-old me tying a tie for my future husband, I'm wearing a tie.
That's a great tie.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's my husband's. My daughter, well, my non-binary kid picked it out when we thought they were female. So, yeah.
It's like the right length.
Yeah. It's a very short tie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So, hi and welcome.
Hi.
Yeah.
Were you here on?
I was not.
Okay.
Okay.
So, if you would like
Welcome.
to, you can cut a piece of the dress,
Oh.
which was a requirement when you came in on Friday. Yeah.
How's everybody doing?
Good.
Good.
Sorry I'm late.
It's all
Hey,
right.
I was
So is
also
everybody.
late, so.
We were waiting for you.
Awesome. Well,
I feel less bad about it.
You missed my charming story about tying a tie.
You
You'll
really
have to
are
watch
like,
it play.
I'll sum it up for you.
Like a-
In brownies, they teach you how to tie a tie because they expect you to tie it for your husband.
I wonder if it still exists.
probably.
probably.
It did not when my kids did not have it.
I would imagine they probably do.
Every time I learn how to do it, I feel like I can Google.
Oh, no, it is
Half
so
times-
ingrained because we would practice before we put it on at practice, yeah.
But did they teach you to tie it, like, away from yourself, on someone else, or on you yourself?
Both.
Both.
And at one point, I also knew how to tie a perfect bow tie.
Mhm.
From the front, never from
Mhm.
myself, yeah. Yeah.
So why don't we get started?
Okay.
Lee, tell us a little bit about yourself, the work that's in the show.
So, yeah, I kind of instigated this show. I grew up in the 60s. There were a lot of opposite messages in my childhood. I grew up in a Mormon family, which is very, very patriarchal as a religion. Weirdly, my mother started working when I was 10, which was the opposite of what was taught, but I think it was economic necessity. And my mother had worked and had multiple degrees before she got married. I wrote notes.
All right.
So, in childhood, and you can see I brought a lot of books, some of the opposite messages were, as a kid, I'd been given a subscription to Arizona highways. And I love the pictures of the bright red mountains and the desert and the whole thing. And they always had a story about different Native American cultures, and I thought that was fascinating. And then the Wounded Knee sit-in happened. And I heard about people like Russell Means and Leonard Peltier, and like these giants of Native American rebellion and the American Indian movement, and so I was getting from the Arizona highways the exact opposite message. And at church, the Mormons had a big cultural thing, kind of like the Catholic Church, of take them out of their place and make them not Indian. So I was getting that message at church too. And then Mormons, you may not know this, very racist. There are, in the patriarchal levels, boys and men actually level up. So at 12 you receive priesthood level 1, and then you can go up to level 6, depending on how good you are. And yeah, my kid learned this and said, it's like a video game. Yes, you level up. You level up pretty steadily until you're 18, and after that it's based on how good you are. And the thing is, if you're back then, I don't know what it is now because I don't belong to that religion anymore. Black people could only go up 3 levels. They couldn't get the last few levels. And I mean, just black men, because women can't do any of it. But yeah, that did not sit well with me. And yet there was Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement, and I was an early reader of the newspaper, and I would read about all of this stuff and be like, that side is right. What I'm learning in church is wrong, but I'm not allowed to say that out loud. And so when I think about the patriarchy, that's what I mean, is somebody trying to control another person. So I have more to my story, but I think Anthony should tell the story of why this exhibit happened.
Oh, okay, so, I've had the pleasure of telling this story for about 50 times since we've come on the show. But I'll tell it all over again, it's great. So I was showing a piece at Art Fusion up the road here. At a show there, I don't remember if there was a theme to the show or anything.
I don't remember.
It was just, I had this piece in the show, courtship, with the woman running through the woods being chased. And Lee saw that hanging on the wall by the door there, and she came to me and she said, I have this idea for a show. It's called F K The Patriarchy. And I was like, I'm in. I don't need to hear anything else. And that was 2 years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been talking about how to do it, what we wanted to do, and where we wanted to do it, how we could pull it off, because we had this larger ambition than just we want to put some paintings up or some photographs, or we want to make it bigger things. So we always thought of these larger performance pieces or 3D installation pieces to put in it, to really put people into this, help them identify more with things, with the theme. And so and then we had to figure out, well, where do we do that? And we had meetings about where can we do this, and we were brainstorming who will let us do this in their space. And after, probably a year's worth of kicking it around, we finally just were like, no one will give us like the freedom to do this in their own gallery. We'll just make our own gallery. We'll just create our own space where we can do all the things that we want to do everywhere else. And we hope that other people, other artists had the same feeling. Other artists were feeling like, oh, I want to do things that are outside the box, that are bigger than, than what I've been allowed to do. And so, yeah, we just wanted to make a space where nobody would tell us no. And we could say yes a lot. And so that's probably one of the big motivations behind getting this space was this show. We kind of drove that. And so yeah, we definitely wanted to do that as one of our first shows here, because yeah, we felt it important, especially given the current climate. We waited too much longer. Somebody might have stopped us. We got another week. It's not too late, but yeah, so far so good. And then we brought on Lauren.
Yeah.
And
Yes,
and
Can you tell we didn't rehearse or not?
Lee, well, you didn't really approach me. We just started talking at Steel City like a year ago.
Year and a half.
A year and a half ago, yeah, I was at Steel City working on a completely different project, and Lee, I was like, I saw her from across the way, and we sat down and started talking, and we ended up having like a 3-hour conversation just about gender. I think it was, we were talking about like your kids and just like being a mom to like genderqueer people and just like how to navigate that, and like my own experience as a genderqueer person and as a gender fluid person in terms of like patriarchy. And we sat down and we had like a very long conversation at Steel City, and at the end of it, Lee was like, oh, I'm doing this show, like, it's the cult of patriarchy. And I was like, cool, I'm mad, so I love anger. Yeah, I'd love to be part of it. And so then I joined the meetings with Lee and Anthony, and we just sat and talked about what to do and what kind of art we wanted to make. And I had already been doing like fine art, but it was in a very small scale. And I had always had a big dream of doing a big sculpture, interactive, like piece for people. But my studio is very small, it's like 300 square feet, so I couldn't do it there. And like Anthony said, there are no galleries, but there are very few galleries that let you drill into their ceiling or like take out a wall or like build something, unless it's a museum that's like interactive for the clients or like patrons and people coming in. So the opportunity to not only make a political statement, which I love, and to be able to make art that impacts people was really what drew me to this show, but then also to be able to kind of push my bounds as an artist and the bounds of what I've been able to do physically with the confines of the space I was working in was really what intrigued me about it, and about the gallery space. And I'm like, my background is in journalism. I have a degree in journalism and design, and I had not worked in like the news space in a long time, and so I had been looking for a way to transition into more artistic, creative, fine art, both with my photography and like mixed media work, but still keep it political and keep it true to my identity, which was, for a long time I wanted to be a political news journalist and a war photographer and all of these like very hard-hitting things that I grew up and was like, oh, that's actually not safe for me to do, probably I shouldn't do that. But to get to do it in this way that feels really important and really collaborative was awesome. And Lee and Anthony both were like, just make it bigger, make it bigger, make it bigger. Like, don't cut limits on it. And which was really cool, and to get to collaborate with people who don't want to stifle you, but want you to grow, want you to just like be weird, was very transformative.
Yeah. So I think the alluded to the yes and form of
Yeah.
being, and it was like it was like that. It was like cool, and
Yeah.
it was like keep it going.
I feel like
Don't feel like we have to stop yet.
Yeah.
You know.
Every time I brought an idea, I feel like you just be like, okay, we'll take it one step further. Or like keep going. Or just like what
Yeah.
what else can it be? Which is really cool from a collaborative stance, because I feel like in terms of a regular, not that you're not a regular gallery, but just like you bring the work and
I'll
then
take
it's
that.
done and it
I'll
goes
take
along.
that as a compliment.
Yeah.
We are not. Yeah.
Like this space definitely encouraged me to go outside of the box, because that's what we wanted the show to be. And I put up with my ever-changing idea of what I wanted to do, and I never had a solid idea until right before, and like that. And just to play with space is something that I wanted to do for a long time, and so I'm just grateful that I got to create it.
But also, as the token member of the patriarchy up here, I did not want to be. I mean, my wife and I are co-owners here, but I did not ever want to be like the one saying you can't do that, like you can't express that, you can't do that. I wanted to definitely like step out of the way and be like, I'm not going to tell you how to do this thing, or what you can't do, or what the things you can't talk about, or anything like that. I want to be like, because that would be highly ironic. And so,
Which I did not feel, but I realized in the process of making the show that I was still waiting for you to be like, no, you can't do that. Subconsciously, not I didn't realize I was doing it, but as we were planning the show, I kept waiting for you to put the guardrails.
It's a weird place to be as the dual role as the artist in the show and the gallerist, to be do you ever how do you guide it? And I wanted to or do you at all? And is there ever business implications that come in to be oh, now how do we make money on this? So that's never our primary motivation, but at some point, in some way, somehow that does come up at some point, oh, great, how do we make money on, we love the art, but how do we keep the doors open? So it's always a balance. But primary is always make the art first, and then we'll figure out how to make it work.
So I have been calling it F The Patriarchy in my head for since before I worked with and mentioned it to Anthony. But I kept thinking that was a working title. I kept thinking it would have to have a better title, a more palatable title. And I worked in advertising and marketing for a long time, and I'm like, well, how do I say this in a way that's polite and that people will digest it? And Danielle said, no, we're calling it F The Patriarchy. I'm like, oh, we can do that? Nobody's gonna tell me no?
There's no pulling back now. Is there?
And she's
You
like,
guys are
no.
so game.
What's his name?
Yeah.
And then, it came in and we're talking about painting the show, and there's a big yellow piece in the back, and Danielle says, we should do this and light it that way and make it even more important. And I love the way it got hung, which is not the way it became in any other space, And I can't imagine any other space allowing it to be that way. And then it's a perfect counterpoint to Anthony's piece down at the other end. And so you guys have to go look at that later.
I also feel like we need to shout out Danielle.
She doesn't want us to.
Oh,
You can do it, that's okay.
I'm allowed to shout you out. Just because I feel like for all of us and our craziness of planning the show, you a very like voice of reason of like, no, we'll just do this, or we'll just do that, or no, we're calling it Fuck the
Let's-
Patriarchy.
Yeah, let's just go to Home Depot. We'll figure it
Yeah,
out.
like literally, we were like hanging the piece, and I was like freaking out because we couldn't figure it. And she was like, "Let's just all get in the car and go to Home Depot together." And so we did, and so we took a field trip, and we figured it out. And like, when I feel like we were all in our very emotional places about the show, you were very like,
Mhm.
nope, which is very important from not only a show but just as a business and like emotional.
Well, because it's weird, but I don't think we realized before we started, was that every show that we put on now is kind of a complete, like, art piece in itself
Mhm.
that we're creating
Yeah.
as a whole.
Mhm.
And so, like, it's a weird place to be in now that we're having this discussions and we're having these, solving problems and making things kind of on the spot. Like, you're bringing in an idea, and then you're like, okay, now what do I do with it? And then we're finishing it, basically, it got halfway there, and then you get it across the finish line all together. And it's,
Yeah.
I don't think that typically happens.
No, it was very collaborative
Yeah.
as a build, which is really, I enjoyed the
Mhm.
process of all of us kind of
Yeah.
putting our little like tidbits here and there, and then it all somehow came together.
Mhm.
I think the four of us worked really well together and made it more, it is so much more than what I expected. And then I wanted to add in performance elements, and
Oh, yeah.
Lauren
We'll talk about
and
that.
Anna's
Yeah.
performance. So they started, and one person sat on the floor, and then we got to the end of that little set story, and everybody had to sit down because we were so emotional.
Mhm.
I'd say 70% of the people were sitting on the floor like kindergarten, looking at, but, tears streaming. And then one thing that I really liked was afterwards, after their performance was done, it was 45 minutes or something, we took a short break and then brought up one last performer who kind of like made us all feel better, like we could all go back out into the world and survive, even though we just had this huge emotional experience, talking about how the patriarchy had affected these two people in particular. And I want to talk just a little bit about my larger definition of patriarchy. And my larger definition, so when I lived in Beirut, we had to learn French. And 8-year-old me said, that's weird, we're in an Arab country, why am I learning French? And I was told it was because Beirut had been a French colony until 3 years before. Lebanon and French was still the official language. So even in the American schools, you had to learn French. And then all of the whatever schools there were, you had to learn French. You didn't have to learn Arabic. And that was weird to me. So in between the two world wars, right after World War I, the British Empire controlled almost a quarter of the land mass in the world and almost a quarter of the people in the world. That was the British Empire. And when I heard that as an adult, that just like blew my mind. And you can see I'm a huge reader. I read Jimmy Carter's book about the history of Israel, and of course, when I lived in Beirut, we would see Israeli planes flying overhead and doing reconnaissance. And that kind of freaked out 8-year-old me, because they were the enemy. But when I read Jimmy Carter's book, it explained that the British Empire had taken this piece of land that it controlled, then called Palestine, and said, we will get rid of our Jewish problem because they didn't want all the Jews living in England. and moved it over here. And that was how Israel started. And so the British Empire, in my head, has always been directly responsible for that part of that conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians, right? And so to me, that's a big thing. And we also met a lot of Armenians there. And in the 1930s, there was a huge Armenian genocide, which was done by the Turks invading Armenia because they wanted to be the Turkish Ottoman, or the Ottoman Empire again, right? And so to me, that's all part of the patriarchy. And I'll leave you with one more thing that pisses me off about the patriarchy, and that's racism. So 6 million people died during the Holocaust. 12 million people were shipped from Africa to be enslaved in the 1500s to the 1800s. And that's a mind-blowing number of people to me. So that pisses me off. And that's a direct, line to George Floyd. And all of that stuff makes me mad. The only thing I made art about was about being female, because I don't have enough time and energy to make art about all of that. But I do want to acknowledge that there are these other parts of patriarchy that exist, and I think I would like to see disassemble one little piece at a time. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's something Anna and I had talked about too with our performance. So the way we had structured it was, well, my intention to structure it, which kind of then, Anna was the musician who performed, that performed with on the name for context. We have been going back and forth about how to talk about our own experiences with patriarchy, but I didn't want to be just about me, not only because I felt too vulnerable, but also because to me that's not really the point of this show. The point is like the system of patriarchy. And the structure I ended up coming up with was through my own little experiences with grief and patriarchy and sexism and all the intersections that go into it. We ended on a note of like global patriarchy and systemic patriarchy. And I think that was really intentional for both Anna and I. She ended up putting in a more political protest song at the end of it because we wanted to really hammer home to people, like, this is not just a women's issue, or it's not just a person-to-person issue, it's a global, class issue, it's a 1% issue, it's a decades and centuries of violence and oppression and hatred. And it was really important to me to hammer that home because, it's impossible to expect one person to, tackle the entire global system in one go. I think that's a little unreasonable. But I do feel like, at least for me as an artist, I put that pressure on myself to talk about all of the intersections all at once. But only what I can do is just talk about the parts that affect me. And as a Jewish person, as someone who's very vocal and pro-Palestine, that for me has been such a big catalyst of getting other people, especially other Christian people, other white people, to understand that it is a very nuanced global systemic issue that directly stems from greed and patriarchy and men thinking that they have a divine right to rule. And so that was what I found most powerful about this space, was that it finally gave us an opportunity, I think, to have that conversation with people in a way that didn't feel like they were being attacked for not knowing, or it let them engage with it in a way that was very emotional and very personal, because a lot of them know us and they know Lee and they know Anthony and Danielle, and so it's a little bit more of a salon-esque space to talk about it versus a digital political space, which can get very heavy, and I don't believe in just yelling at people for the sake of yelling at them, which is some people's MO, and I respect that. I don't personally operate that way. But I think that was what was so powerful for me, at least, when we asked me if I wanted to, get up with Anna and read something, to take that opportunity to have the global political conversation in a way that didn't feel as volatile as the news feels. So, and I'm very appreciative.
Do you want to say anything about how the patriarchy has hurt you as a man?
Well, I will say what it makes me think of is, a bit of, I will say, I will use this, example. As a, divorced person with children, there's also the side of it that is low expectations as well of men, because we don't have to do a lot of things in relationships, it's just expected that we're just absent. And you actually get a fair bit of pushback if you don't conform to that expectation. And there's a lot of people who are threatened by that. If you say, show up to every parent-teacher conference and you volunteer and you actually come in when you're divorced and you say, hey, I want, time with my kids and I need this, I want to do this, and they're like, they look at you like you're, what do you need? And it's, the fact that, it's just, it's not like I'm turning it around to be like, oh, we're the victim. But that in a system like that, where the patriarchal system, like, it can victimize you because it assumes things about you. Like the fact that when I went through that whole thing in Michigan where we lived, you're in the court cases, you're always the defendant. No matter what you're coming back to court, if you bring the case back to court or anything, you're still referred to as the defendant. So you're always in this defensive posture, even if you were the one bringing the motion. And it is this confrontational aspect that is really not helpful. But it's just this assumptions that are built in that as, men, we're just meant to, you just go to work and you make the money, you are assumed that this is your role. And then, you try and step out of that and the whole system is like, whoa, wait a minute. This is not where you're supposed to be. Get back in line, sir. Yeah. So it doesn't serve anyone well. And so, yeah, it should change for all of us, because it doesn't serve men well either
Right.
to have that. We could all do a lot better with a little more, seeing ourselves as more equals and assuming that we're all equals. But it's tough when you're battling against centuries of eons of that.
Like conditioning.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny that you bring that up because I think I definitely had to unlearn some things when we started planning this show. Because I remember Lee was like, oh yeah, like, oh, we're bringing Anthony. And I was like, Anthony? A man.
What am I doing here?
Yeah, and I think the first time we all met at Still City, I was like, I don't like, there was like a lot of judgment, I think, at first. And then as I got to know you and like unlearn my own like internal patriarchy, it was really helpful to like, exactly what you're saying, like, we're all on equal footing because we're all suffering under the same system.
Yeah, and I think that's part of overall, like, if there's some overarching mission here that we're trying to do, regardless of the theme of the individual show happening at the time, it's this notion of expanding and encouraging empathy and understanding through art. And I refer to it as third wave romanticism, but then I sound like I'm advocating for some kind of art religion. But but it's this idea that through art, you can expand people's understanding of other people's experiences. And that's really what art is, right? It's someone creating something that other people can look at and say, oh, okay, I understand that a little better now than I did before. And not just, oh, that's a pretty thing, you know, which can also be mind expanding too. But we really wanted to not be afraid to say, hey, maybe people should be a little more empathetic toward their fellow man and stop being quite so judgmental. We just snap to judgment all the time. We could encourage that a little more. If we all kind of did that a little more, I think we enjoy that world a little more. So, yeah, changing the world.
One painting at a
One
time.
people at a time. So, yeah.
That's a good way to put it, I like that.
So, thank you guys
Thank you.
for your work. So, I
Thank you
suppose-
for opening the gallery for me.
That's
Hey,
dedication.
I wasn't gonna get away from it, Lee. Come on, I wasn't gonna just open this place and be like, second thought. No, yeah.
Thanks for having us and the trust.
Hey, that's why we're here. Yes. No, thank you.
Thank you.
So,
Questions from the crowd, anyone?
This is something I'd like to say. You need to Google Max Carter and Ramallah Friends School. He's a Quaker, and his great aunt taught at this Ramallah Friends School. He does, their service trips, but he does a different way of saying it, service learning trips. And he's written a few books.
Cool.
Too. Still has friends. They're doing a trip this summer. His wife is there now. She's on her way there. Hoping she gets in. But they have friends in the West Bank, Palestinian friends, in the stories.
Yeah.
And my son-in-law went in high school to Ramallah Friends School as part of the service trip. And I just think it gives a perspective that you appreciate.
Yeah, thank
The
you.
truth.
Thank you. You keep looking around like, what are you?
I'm looking at the work.
yeah, he hasn't actually, a couple
He
of
hasn't
people
seen
here hasn't
I
actually seen
haven't
work
seen it.
yet.
And, I think it's an interesting, well, it's a very deep, emotional, concept, all of it. My question to you would be, how much of, patriarchy is due to, I understand that they're like, integrally interwoven, but a lot of what you were talking about seemed to be more about colonialism and Western European Judeo-Christian right to rule sort of stuff, which I understand is totally, which has resulted in this worldwide patriarchal dominant system that we have. Do you plan to do a follow-up show about specifically colonialism, racism, these kinds of aspects that are not necessarily gender-based, but are systematically based in just white Western European Judeo-Christian traditions?
I would love to do something that big. I think that would be amazing.
Well, I mean, you could even break it down into smaller bits, because
Right.
obviously patriarchy is a bit of that.
Right.
But,
Or-
It seems
or-
a lot of the points you were making were, to me, more about colonialism and world geography kind of problems than they were gender-specific problems,
Right,
which clearly exist, clearly are part of the problem, but I was just
Yeah.
wondering about future shows and like, something like, you know, fuck the colonists, or whatever you wanted to say.
Since we're becoming more and more, we're moving back into that
so,
realm, yeah.
yeah, I would love to say all of that. I think I use patriarchy as a stand-in word for any time one group of people tries to control another group of people, whether that's through gender conflict or class conflict or.
I totally agree with
Yeah.
that. But using the word patriarchy implies
the gender.
gender relations.
Right,
Which
Absolutely.
maybe this show is clearly, but maybe that's not like all of it. So I was just wondering if
Right.
there was a follow-up show or if something was in the work. That,
No, I mean, it is now, I mean.
yeah, now I got
I'm
it.
down.
okay, good.
And I mean, I think
Thanks,
Anna,
Michael.
the singer-songwriter, has definitely included that in her songs because she has experienced racism so clearly. And I would love to do all that. My direct emotional experience has been a lot about being female, of course, because I
Right.
am female. I can't tell you what it's like to be Native American because I am not Native American. I can tell you what I, as a white person, have experienced and seen as unjust. And I think that it would be great to add other voices, like I was able to bring in Anthony as the male side and Lauren as the queer side. I would have to find other people to collaborate with to do that, in fact, in a way that I want to say it.
Yeah, I think that would be a fascinating show.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a shitload to say there, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah,
But I
yeah.
think, it's
If
hard to.
you know people, send them my way.
Yeah. Like, it's hard to separate, really, right? To talk
Yeah.
about one aspect and not think about all the rest of it, because it's all kind of like, you could, I mean, yeah, how much of the wars that we're talking about that resulted in all these things were just big dick measuring contests between, men who ruled these countries and said, you insulted my manhood, and I can't, handle that, so I'm gonna send an army
True,
to
but
decimate you.
that isn't to say that, Elizabeth I didn't have huge implications on
Right.
the British Empire and colonialism in general and the idea of like Western conquerage of
Yeah.
the globe.
Yeah.
Or like, let's not let the ladies off the hook on that.
Oh, no.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that, so this piece is about like my queer relationship with my ex who's trans, and sure, not traditionally like a man by birth, but in his transition had not unlearned his own patriarchy and had the experience of like growing up as a woman and being socialized as a woman before he transitioned. And I think even that small instance is like why I appreciate Lee bringing me into this show, because it does show, at least something that I was trying to tackle in my smaller pieces and in the writing piece that we had shared, is that like you don't necessarily have to be a man to suffer from patriarchy or uphold it. And like we are all complicit in certain ways of upholding and like doing violence to one another within